Hi, I'm Peter Reynolds, and welcome to Pros and Conversations, the podcast that not only interviews people from the world of the arts, science, and business, but also provides you, the viewer, with some tips to help you reach your entrepreneurial goals. Today, I'm joined by Damon Adachi, and he is a marketing consultant with Sevenfold Marketing. How you doing, Damon?
Good. Thanks for having me back.
Excellent. So today we're going to be shifting gears a little bit and talking about women in entrepreneurship. And I know that we were talking about this earlier, how that women are basically only 50% likely to start businesses than men.
Yeah, that's a very interesting stat. I'm not really sure what the rationale is behind that, but hopefully we'll get some at least anecdotal insight from our guest today.
Absolutely, and that's a perfect segue to interview our guest, Jennifer Kendall. And Jennifer Kendall is the CFO with Discovernet, as well as the owner of Acuity. Welcome to Pros and Conversations, Jennifer.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Damon.
So, Jennifer, just to jump right into it, what is Acuity?
Acuity is a training and coaching company that I started about 2 years ago. We focus in on helping entrepreneurs, mainly female entrepreneurs, with productivity systems and processes so that they can thrive in their business. Essentially, I'm trying to help the female entrepreneur build a business that they're proud of, that they love, while living a life they love.
It's interesting that you say while living the life they love, that balance, between work and life. What I always find interesting though is that, for a lot of us, myself included, you're working in the corporate world, you're putting in 50, 60 hours a week, and you're thinking to yourself, I need to get off the hamster wheel. I need to, take control of my life. I'm going to start a business where I'm going to put in 100 hours a week.
Yes.
So can you maybe back it up a little bit for the listener and tell us sort of, where you came from and, how you sort of made that both mental leap to get in, to do your own thing, but also how you accomplished it?
Well, it's an interesting question because I think that a lot of entrepreneurs get into business based on their pain. So there's this concept of pain, purpose. So our pain leads to our purpose. And essentially, that's how Acuity was born, out of pain. So in my old life, I like to say I was an accountant. I'm a designated CPA, CGA, and I was climbing that corporate ladder when one day I kept looking up that ladder and I didn't think that's what I wanted forever. You're right, the hours get longer as you climb that ladder. I was already at controller level, getting promoted to director, and I'm looking up and I'm like, do I want that level of responsibility? And I mean, as an accountant, my life was limited, right? I had year ends, I had quarter ends. Your first 2 weeks of the month were booked solid. And that's not what I was looking at that forever. And I was like, this isn't what I want. But I didn't know what I wanted, which is what led me onto this path. My husband was buying a second business and offered me an opportunity to join him in the entrepreneurial world, which is what I did. And that's where I started to experience the pain. Because when I joined him, I floundered. I was raised to be an employee, not an entrepreneur. And so all of a sudden, I'm faced with things I've never had to decide before. I had to come up with the plans. I had to come up with all the systems and the processes. And I didn't do it well. And so I eventually, because I'm a great accountant, showed my husband, my partner, that financially it would be better for me to go back to work. And I did. But once I was there, I realized I was already making that shift, that mindset shift that comes from moving from an employee to an entrepreneur. And I was no longer comfortable in the employee space.
Yeah.
It still took me another few years to figure out how to make the transition back to become an entrepreneur, because I had to do the work on myself and get my confidence and figure out what was not working for me. But once I did that, I came back and joined my husband full force in his businesses. And what I discovered was that I wasn't unique. There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there, especially women, who when they make that transition, they do so based on a skill, but becoming a business owner requires other skills. So we might know our craft, but we don't know how to then run the business. And what ends up happening is we end up working so hard, we take a 40, 60, 70-hour work week in our corporate life and turn it into 100 hours. In fact, that was one of the reasons I hated being an entrepreneur the first time around. I gave up everything. We used to ballroom dance, and that was one of the first things I cut out. So I gave up an extracurricular activity that I enjoyed doing, that was good for my health. It was, fun, social, and I gave it all up. And by cutting that out, I made my life all about a business that I wasn't in love with. And in the end, I hated everything I did every day. I resented the businesses we had. And that's why I went back to the corporate world. When I came back, I realized I needed to learn how to make, not balance, I hate that word, harmony. I had to create harmony between the business that I wanted to work in and create and build and a life.
Wow,
that
that's
I loved.
fantastic information. There's a lot to unpack there. So, so I'm going to pull it back a little ways to when you were started. And I want a little more detail from you on when you say you were more trained to be an employee than an entrepreneur. What does that mean in terms of your experiences leading up to your entrepreneurship?
So I come from, not a rich family. We struggled. My parents claimed bankruptcy at one point. We lived in apartments with not enough bedrooms. So you think about the way we go through life, where actually, your success is defined as going to school, getting a post-secondary education, and getting a job, and a good job. And so I'm conditioned for that. So I go out into the world thinking I'm going to get a job. My goal at this point is not to live paycheck to paycheck, because that's what I knew growing up. Right? So there's security in having that paycheck. But what you don't realize that there isn't really security, right? Like there isn't. I mean, I think that's what I saw as I looked up the ladder, is that the job security actually disappears as you climb up, because you're taking on more risk, more responsibility. And that's where, all the challenges.
I find it really interesting that you talk about traditionally we are trained to think about education and employment and success is measured in those factors. And yet, when we watch film and TV and movies, there's the shopkeeper and he's a proud, entrepreneur all by himself with his apron on at the butcher shop or whatever it is, right?
Yes.
But I wonder if there's enough of those examples for women to feel inspired to think about entrepreneurship outside of the traditional paths of becoming part of the workforce. And the bigger challenge seems to be for women in finding that work-life harmony. I love that. Way better than balance.
Yes.
And then it doesn't really create a ton of room to think about, starting out on your own and being an entrepreneur. So maybe that's what's leading to these statistical anomalies of having far fewer female entrepreneurs. The next thing, I'm going to let Peter jump in a moment, but the next thing I was interested in is when you say the skill set is so different for an entrepreneur versus an employee. What are the major differences you find there? Because I've had that same experience.
So for me, I think I had a head start because I was an accountant. So because I was an accountant, I had the financial background, and being an accountant means I'm very detail oriented. I'm very organized. I love systems and processes. But what fascinated me as I look back on my journey is that I didn't take those skill sets and bring them with me. It was like there was a corporate me, and then all of a sudden it was an entrepreneurial me. And I was like, but I don't know how to do this. So if you look at a lot of other entrepreneurs that start businesses based on their craft. And Peter, you said one of you said the butcher standing behind the counter. That, you think of all of our trades. They're starting a business because of their craft or because what they're passionate about. Every coach, a nutritionalist, anybody who is taking their passion, they don't necessarily have the skill sets of making a plan. And if you make a plan, how do you follow through on that plan? How do you then transition that you're going to hire even a VA? Even if you don't have staff, hire a VA. How do you delegate? How do you then share, the space with someone else to create something at the end and meet timelines? How do you do sales? A lot of us in the corporate world have never had to sell anything. We do, but we don't realize we are, right? But how do you do sales? How do you speak up for yourself? In my world, I'm trained to understand that communication is a lot more than what we're saying. It's more about our tone, our physical. Like I'm a hand talker. I get very excited. I also get very red. But all of that comes out. And if we're feeling unconfident on the inside, without us even realizing it, that's showing up in how we present ourselves. And if you don't have an idea of what's happening between your head and the rest of you, everything else breaks down. Those are the skill sets I don't think we have coming in to be an entrepreneur.
100%. I totally agree with you. I think that I also found it much easier to sell somebody else's business than my own.
Yes.
I came from a world of sales and graphic design and working for printing houses, and going in to a random business and saying, here's the company, you need their services, for me was very easy. To suddenly say it's me that I'm selling became extremely difficult. And it's absolutely true that a lot of those skills that we either we don't transport them over, or they, it's very interesting. I also like what you said about passion, and how we start our businesses because we're passionate about something and we do it well. And this line, I know I've talked to Damon about this idea of, I love what I do so much I do it for free. And my wife's saying to me, but you're not going to do it for free, right? And that's where that business comes in, because if you don't have those business skills behind it, you're not going to succeed at your passion.
Exactly.
Do you want to know something interesting about entrepreneurs? Your comment about, I do it for free. If you think about how a lot of us are raised, we're raised that money is evil. That money brings out the worst in us, or you don't need money to be happy. Think about all the things you've heard about money. So when you actually sit down with an entrepreneur and you start looking at their values, money doesn't appear in their top 5 values. So how are we going to make money if it's not something we even value?
And I think that's part of the big mind shift that you talk about, going from corporate to being self-sufficient and self-employed, is that corporate is very driven about profit. And one of the things that I struggled with when I was in the corporate world was saying, this is how I want to operate in my job, and getting pushback from higher up saying, that doesn't help us meet the bottom line. Versus in my self-employed entrepreneurial world, profit is the last thing on my mind when I'm servicing a client. It's client satisfaction, it's relationship building, it's feeding my ego of getting approval from other people. That's usually number one. I should put that number one. But ultimately, I had a meeting this morning with somebody who was a little sticker shocked by the price of the design work that they required. And I just went, yeah, I'll just do it for free then, because I want to do this project and it looks like fun. So yeah, it's a very, very different mindset. And yet that has to be balanced with the fact that you have to be responsible for the income and the revenue on not on a scheduled paycheck coming in the door anymore, but project by project for a lot of us. So it's a very, very different mindset.
Very different mindset. Yeah, I actually recommend that we don't look at pro bono work until we're making a certain level of income.
Good practice.
I agree. It's easy. That was actually something, because I started in the world of working with nonprofit organizations, and it's very easy to fall into that. Well, I really believe in what I'm doing, so I'm going to drop that price this time. And then that seemed to be the price all the time.
Yes. There's also, Peter, you talked about how hard it was for you to go out and sell your product versus someone else's. There's a vulnerability about going out there and asking people to believe in you. That's hard.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Pros and Conversations is brought to you by For the Record Productions, providing video production services to corporate and nonprofit clients for over 20 years. To learn more about how we can help your business, visit videosthatmatter.ca and by the Business Alliance, a professional peer group that helps you grow your business through networking, collaboration, and sound advice. To learn more about how to become a member, visit jointhealliance.biz.
And do you think that there's a difference between men and women in that angle of things? And I'm very, very interested in the difference between male and female entrepreneurs. And I'm interested in your clientele because I know you focus on women as your customers for your coaching, but I know you also have some male clients. And what are the differences there? And I find this fascinating, to be honest with you.
You know, what is one of the most fascinating things I've seen is women entrepreneurs almost shy away from the processes, the systems, which they absolutely need because they want to stay in the creative, in the flow. They want to let life guide them. And I'm like, you can have both. But getting them to see that if they have the systems and the processes, that they'll then create the freedom is a little bit more difficult. My male clients seem to grasp that faster.
But do you have to coax them back into their passion?
Yes, they're much more. They don't allow themselves to feel almost.
Really?
Yeah.
Silly man.
It's not silly men. I think you're asking for the difference between men and women, and when I think about myself. Something you said right at the beginning, there was never a female entrepreneur for me to look at in my life to say that is how I can be. I had, models that were working and were struggling for that balance or harmony, I prefer, of being a parent, a mother, and working. There was no one in my life that showed me how to do it well. And the business owners that I had as examples, their businesses failed. So there wasn't a woman leader. And if we think about the ones we know, now maybe it's because, my husband's business is in the IT field, but there's no IT leaders that are women. There is now, if you think of, I think it's Google has a female leader, correct? But I'm not, or higher, she's a VP or something like that. I'm not sure. I might have the wrong company. It might be Facebook. Actually, I think it's Facebook. But there isn't a lot of well-known female entrepreneurs that are strong. So I think, Damon, you're right. There isn't that leadership, but it's also hard to find a strong female, and I'm not one of them, but a strong female leader that has kids and runs a successful business. I don't have kids. Right. I think a woman who has kids running a business, I see it in my clients, has a whole other different challenge that I don't have.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to generalize on that, but I think that, we saw that COVID impacted female entrepreneurs disproportionately to male entrepreneurs. Yes. And part of it is because what you're looking at is some home-based businesses where you are, trying to manage a sales account for a product with stay-at-home children that are being homeschooled through online schooling, and it's impossible. Peter, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, no, and just to follow up with what Jennifer was saying, and I think it does disproportionately affect female-led businesses when it came to the pandemic, because a lot of women sort of fall back into those traditional roles. Parenting and taking care of the house. And it just seemed like a natural fallback position where it might be less so for men. I wanted to ask Jennifer about, for people listening there, when they're thinking, I'm in that same boat. I don't have any role models out there that I can sort of base my business ideas on and how I can actually manage a family and a career. What can they do?
Peter, that's a great question. We think of networking events as just for business owners. It's not. I have seen some incredible things at networking events where recent grads have come and joined in networking events just to meet people. They not necessarily do they know what they want to do. They're not sure if they want to own their own business, but they're coming out and meeting with other people. And especially if you target a female networking group, we love to share. We are natural nurturers. We are natural mentors. An organization that has female leaders, you'll see that their mentoring opportunities are stronger. So just to consider that you go into that networking event, find people that you connect with, reach out with them after and ask for the coffee and start picking their brain. Ask them to perhaps mentor you or guide you or, whatever you need. And likely you'll get the help. But that's a great opportunity to surround yourself with people who are doing what you want to do and succeeding.
And just to connect that to Acuity Path, because one of the things that I know is a big issue for me when I started as an entrepreneur was accountability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only one getting myself out of bed in the morning. I'm the only one that if I don't hit my quarterly projections, there's no one to tell me off or to call me onto the carpet. So
Yeah.
And I know that with Acuity Path, you have accountability groups. And I thought that was such an interesting, I'd never heard of that before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. The accountability groups came because I was looking for a way to connect with entrepreneurs, to get my name out there. So I started interviewing entrepreneurs. I'm taking my own advice there, but I started interviewing entrepreneurs and asking them when they networked, what was working, what wasn't working. I originally thought I was going to do a networking group. What I learned from that research by, looking for my target client and sitting down with them and asking these questions was they didn't need another networking group. What they needed was accountability. They wanted something where they had support and they weren't alone, because working as an entrepreneur becomes extremely lonely. It was one of the things that struck me is there's no colleague beside you that you can go vent with or bounce an idea off of. You're by yourself. And if you do have a team, you can't share the struggles and the challenges you're having with your team because they need to look up to you. And depending on the relationship you have with your spouse, if they're not an entrepreneur, they also don't get it. I remember that when, before I became an entrepreneur, I didn't understand the struggles my husband was going through. And I would get, frustrated and angry with him. Now we can have those conversations, but back then we couldn't. So depending on your situation, it's very lonely. Then the pandemic hit, literally. And I wanted a way to help people through, especially those first initial weeks. So as I was talking about starting accountability groups and all of this happened, I said, let's do one. And I did it for the first 3 months for free. I got a group of people together and started my first accountability group. And then because it was the pandemic and life was changing so fast for us, I did it weekly. And what I ended up seeing in those 3 months was that we needed each other. And so going out and networking online at that point with other entrepreneurs, I saw the difference between those that were in the accountability group. They were starting to thrive. They had been able to pick themselves up, make the changes to their business that they needed, but they were supported by the other entrepreneurs in the group, getting questions asked. We were sharing information with one another. We were supporting and cheering each other. And I realized that I had something special. And so from there, I turned it into a paid model and opened it up. And now we have more than one accountability group. But every accountability group for me starts with a celebration. Everybody has to share a win. We don't, as entrepreneurs, celebrate enough, and we don't share our successes. And even if it's a little thing, like, you did your morning routine 3 days this week, let's celebrate that. So we start every meeting with celebration. We then do a check-in. And one of the things I try to stress is that if you didn't get items done on your accountability list, ask yourself why. What got in your way? Where were you uncomfortable? What do you need support with? Just because you didn't achieve something isn't a bad thing. It's an opportunity right there to find out what you need help with. So I I've heard people say that they don't want to be shamed. There's no shaming in our accountability groups. It's more a lift. It's how can we support you? What do you need help with? Where were your roadblocks? Sometimes it's just life.
Right.
But other times it's because we're absolutely terrified of something. And then how can we get over it?
This is extremely refreshing for me. And the thing that is resonating for me the most is the difference between balance and harmony. And it's almost as if balance is the masculine version of that concept of trying to keep everything in place and managed. And the female version is harmony, which is more about integrating those things and integrating with other people. And I think that in the world of small business and entrepreneurship, this has got to be a growing trend where we get more of the Zen yoga kind of, the more of the present and mindful approach to business, which is going to come from the female side of the spectrum first. That's where the early adopters will be, and that's where the champions will be. But it needs to come across the line. And in our networking group that Peter and I belong to, the female presence changes the dynamic so much, so positively. It's immediately we have that harmony in the room, and it allows us to operate much more holistically. So what you're doing is fantastic. I love it. And I hope there's more of it to come.
Thanks.
No, agreed. I think that, particularly with networking, and that's one of the reasons why I joined our networking group, Damon, was that, it's so easy. We live in a vacuum. I live in this, black hole of, I have ideas. Are they any good? I don't know. Let me try them, never looking to see if someone else has done that, has gone down that path. So, that ability to bounce ideas off other people who are in a similar situation, absolutely invaluable. And also can impact the loneliness, I think. When you said that, Jennifer, I absolutely didn't realize how much I felt that until the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the joke is, as my wife would say, there was a lot of, obviously, many negatives associated with the pandemic, for people's lives and business. But my wife will sometimes come up and she sees me playing with my son in the, or I'm talking with her in the middle of the day. I have people around me all day, which I didn't have. And, that has been a real benefit for me, to be able to have that, more of that harmony that we've been talking about. Couldn't go, I saw this on your website, and it says that you're a master practitioner NLP coach. I couldn't let you go without asking what that was.
So NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. It's a way of looking at how we communicate with one another and what is going. And remember earlier I talked about how our communication is more than just our words. How we receive information and then how we filter it impacts everything we do. Also, 90% of what we do is driven on an unconscious level. We do things without even realizing we're doing it. We have a strategy for how we buy, how we make a decision. And if you don't believe me, think about how you put on your pants. You put on your pants likely the same way every single day and you don't even think about it. It's a strategy. So when you think about how much we do that's unconscious, all of that is happening because of the communication between you and your actions. So NLP looks at that communication and dives into the unconscious part to figure out what's stopping you. Most of what we do is all been programmed when we were young children. This isn't about, diving in and digging up all the pain that we've been through. It's about reprogramming so that you can get rid of the strategies that no longer work for you and put in new strategies. I mentioned, that money isn't a value. We can actually help an entrepreneur change that. And we can actually take money and insert it as a value so that they then want to make money versus doing everything for free. If you have trouble picking up the phone or avoiding conflict, you're running a strategy. And that's what it's all about. So I did a lot of training to work through tools and processes that will help clear up things. because I can teach you how to write a plan. I can teach you how to plan. I can teach you how to organize your day, your week. But there's a point where that no longer works because there's something else running. Or we hit a ceiling and we can't up level any further. We hit this wall and you need to break through it to get to the next level in your business. That's when the master practitioner stuff comes in play, and I help with what's running underneath so that you can get to the next level, or you can, clear out that stuff that's stopping you from your success.
And on that theme of next level, so for the entrepreneur who's listening, whether they're a young person who is, in a corporate job and looking to make that leap, or maybe it's someone whose children are all grown up and they're looking for that next step in their lives, what's a piece of advice, something actionable that they can do right now?
Something they can do right now is go interview people. I honestly, I wish I had done more of that. I wish I had known where my roadblocks were going to be before I got there. I think if I had known that I was going to, people talk about your inner critic, if whatever it is for you, if I had known that becoming an entrepreneur was going to amplify that voice in my head, the voice that isn't always so nice to us, I would have been prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for it. So take that advice of finding especially a woman entrepreneur networking group and connect with people who you resonate with and ask them what it's been like. What do they recommend? What do they suggest? Where do they think their next steps are? Women love to share. We love to share. Reach out to them, let them share with you, and find out what you're going to face, because that sets you up for success.
And where's the website that people can find you?
Acuitypath.ca.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight with us today. I definitely learned a lot, and I think our listeners are going to take a lot away from this conversation. We've been speaking with Jennifer Kendall, who is the CFO of Discovernet, as well as the owner of Acuity Path, as well as Damon Adachi, who is a marketing consultant with Sevenfold Marketing. I'm Peter Reynolds, and thank you for listening to Pros and Conversations.